everybody, welcome back to The Clinical Trials Guru. Again, it's theclinicaltrialsguru.com. Today's video is not really a question that I directly received, but it's a topic and a concept and a theme. I guess a theme is the better word for it. And by the way, how about that Super Bowl? One of the best Super Bowls I've seen in a long time. Just happened yesterday. And one of my next book reviews is going to be The Education of a Coach, which is basically a biography, the best biography on Bill Belichick that there is. And I'm not a Patriots fan or anything, but I'll save that for later. Stay tuned for that video. Today's video for clinical research is going to be revolving around the theme of a PI's responsibilities and what you as a site can do if your PI abandons you or decides that, hey, he doesn't want to do research anymore, or starts a competing business. Could be a number of things. So a lot of you research site owners out there may not have dealt with this, or maybe you have, but it is a possibility. So here's what you do, and this would apply for you PIs also that are the site owners, because there comes a point where you would want to build a company and you would want to actually have other investigators. So rule number one, okay, never be totally dependent on one person for anything, all right? And in the case of clinical research, you don't want to be overly dependent on one PI. You want to have multiple investigators. So ideally, you would like to have someone as a PI, but then surround him or her with a lot of sub-Is, and from time to time, give a study to one of those sub-Is for them to be the PI. And hopefully, you can have a satellite site, or you can just have multiple studies from the same research clinic. But you don't want to be too dependent on any one PI, because they are human beings. They can get upset. They can get emotional. They can get greedy. Okay, they can do a lot of things, and you don't want to be burned. You don't want to be stuck holding the bag because you were too dependent on one PI. So, should a PI ever abandon you or leave your site or start their own clinic, a competing clinic, there are a couple of important things that you need to think about. Number one is, regardless of whether they're starting a new company or competing or abandoning you, they, not you, they are responsible for their study. Even if it's a study they haven't done in a long time, as long as it's not closed out, it's still their responsibility. As a matter of fact, even if it is closed out, it's still their responsibility to retain those records. So they can't get off the hook that easily. What I would do is, if I was a research site owner and my PI opened a new clinic across the street because he was upset with what I was paying him and he thought he can do better on his own, I would make sure that the sponsor was aware of this. I would make sure that I would find out if he's willing to cooperate with me to get these studies closed out that he left at my site. If he is, then it's fine. We'll close him out and he can go on his merry way, and I'll at least have these studies closed out. If he does not comply with that, if he does not want to help you close out the studies, if he refuses to take responsibility for his study, which he signed the 1572, then I would escalate this to the sponsor, and I would make sure that you're protecting your brand at all times. Let the sponsor know that you might have a sub-investigator who can take over as PI. That way, if there's any accounts receivable still outstanding from that sponsor to your site, you can still get it. So you may have to switch the PI if the sponsor is willing to do that. If not, then let the sponsor know that you are building a company with other investigators. So for future studies, we don't have to worry about this guy abandoning us because we have, X amount of different sub-Is. And so this is why you don't want to be overly dependent on one PI. Alright? So never forget that ultimately it's the PI's responsibility. The FDA could care less what the company structure is of your research site, or whether you guys just closed your company and opened a new one, or whether the PI got mad and moved across the street and opened his new one. The FDA could care less about any of that. They hold the PI responsible. They might come to your site looking for the PI if things get really bad and really ugly, but the PI is ultimately responsible for his studies that were under his name that he signed a 1572 for. So pay attention for those things: investigator responsibilities and making sure that your brand and your image is not tarnished. Never get too dependent on any one PI. And by the way, this rule applies to everything, not just PIs. Never be dependent on one source of income. Never be dependent on one employee. We've seen issues like this all the time, so the same is true with PIs. Never be too dependent on one PI. Hopefully this helps, and this is good for you PIs as well, because like I said, you may be building a company and eventually you'll start needing to delegate tasks to other doctors for you to grow your company. Don't get too dependent on one PI, alright? Thank you guys for watching. Dan at theclinicaltrialsguru.com. Take care.